really the focus should be on, to the extent businesses can, to prevent chargebacks in the first place. And our guide has some great tips on steps that business owners can take to prevent chargebacks from occurring in the first place.
The Small Business Rundown is the official podcast of the National Federation of Independent Business, the member-driven voice of small business. NFIB and our members advocate to keep America's small businesses strong and independent in Washington, D.C., all 50 states, and the nation's courts.
Welcome to the Small Business Rundown, a bi-weekly podcast with information on independent business victories and challenges in Washington, D.C. and state capitals. I'm Holly Wade, NFIB's Executive Director of the Research Center, filling in as guest host today. NFIB's Beth Milito, Vice President of the Small Business Legal Center, is with me to discuss why credit card chargebacks happen and how to prevent it. Thanks, Beth, for joining me.
Thanks, Holly, for inviting me to join you today and participate.
Can you start by explaining what is a credit card chargeback in case listeners haven't dealt with one before?
Sure. So a chargeback occurs when the merchant charges a credit card to complete a transaction, whether they're buying a service or a product. So it could be even in a doctor's office or, say, in a bookstore. So when a merchant charges a credit card to complete a transaction and the cardholder later disputes the charge. So they call their bank and say, I didn't buy that, or what I bought isn't what I thought I bought, or they charged too much, and the bank places a hold on the charge amount. So often this occurs, again, as I said, when there's a dispute about the product or service that was purchased, but it can also happen when the cardholder is a victim of fraud.
Okay, good information to have. You covered this a bit with that explanation of why do chargebacks typically happen, but if you could elaborate on that a bit.
Yes. So the chargeback can happen when there is fraud, and that is when your credit card is stolen or the credit card number is stolen. So the owner of the card is not the person using the card to purchase the product or service. So that is most problematic. And that is certainly something that we are happy usually when a bank catches that and stops the charge there. More problematic for our members is when a chargeback happens. In other words, the bank halts payment to the merchant because there's a dispute over the product or service. So, the quality wasn't what I expected is what the customer might say there. So that's very problematic because in those instances, then the merchant or the service provider, has actually offered a service or given out a product, and now they're without money there. So that's why, and you may be ready to ask me this too, a chargeback is actually considered a triple loss. So there's three kind of steps there. The merchant loses the profit on the sale. The processor incurs a charge. So the processor who's handling the intermediary between the bank and the merchant incurs a chargeback fee there. And then money is invested on restocking the item or the lost time that the business put out for the service. So we can talk about maybe some preventative steps, but all this to say that it is very problematic for small business owners who lose money and time when chargebacks happen.
Absolutely. This sounds complicated, frustrating, and possibly very time-consuming. So how would a small business owner go about fighting a chargeback if they have one?
So the action of fighting a chargeback is known as chargeback representment. This is a process where the merchant gets to submit evidence to the bank to prove that the transaction was valid and recommend that the decision be overturned. So in other words, that the bank releases the money to the small business owner. So this is where you want to make sure you've got good documentation showing that the charge was valid, that you sent out the item that the customer ordered, that you had documentation showing that it was mailed on this date, and then, again, or the service was what the customer had asked for.
That makes sense. More paperwork, unfortunately, but documentation is the key to going through these processes to help fight chargebacks. After this short break, we'll be back with more from Beth.
If you're an NFIB member, don't miss your chance to vote on the new NFIB member ballot. If you haven't already voted, please log in today to tell us your position on 5 key federal policy issues. It only takes a few minutes to fill out your ballot and shape how NFIB advocates for small business owners. Go to nfib.com/votemyballot to tell us what's important to your small business.
And now back to the show. Is there anything that can be done if a small business owner does not win a chargeback dispute?
So the small business owner can usually move on to an appeal process. And there is also potential, to take the customer to small claims court. I would say that the business owner should do all they can to reverse the chargeback. The deck is sort of stacked against them if you're moving on to the appeal process. And then, of course, small claims court is expensive and time-consuming too. I would say that really the focus should be on, to the extent businesses can, to prevent chargebacks in the first place. And our guide has some great tips on steps that business owners can take to prevent chargebacks from occurring in the first place.
That makes a lot of sense. And yes, time-consuming is not something that small business owners want to deal with when they're looking to go back and operate their business. You and I both know, again, that small business owners don't have a lot of free time on their hands. What are the things that they can do to prevent chargebacks from happening in the first place?
So they can use a secure payment gateway. So a good, secure credit card processor is very important. Obtaining customer signatures is also very important, especially when shipping a product, if at all possible. Requesting identification for in-person transactions can be very helpful too. Responding promptly to any customer inquiries is very important too. So if a customer who you've sent a product to sends an email in complaining about something, respond promptly, because you don't want the next email to come from the bank saying that we've placed a hold on the funds there. So again, a lot of this is nowadays with customer management too, of expectations of products and services there too. Again, preventing the chargeback from happening in the first place there. It's very easy for customers now, and some of our listeners may have done this too. Pick up the phone or text your bank and say, I'm disputing this charge, for whatever reason. And it's not necessarily for a fraudulent reason, but it could be just because it was not necessarily the product they thought they were getting. So this is where setting out clear expectations, making sure descriptions on your website are clear too, and then responding to customer complaints. All that can go a long way to preventing chargebacks from happening in the first place.
Wonderful information. Before we go, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Listeners can check out the entire NFIB Legal Guide series at nfib.com/legal guides. And this would include our model employee handbook, our guide to handling ocean inspections, and our wage and hour guide. And again, all of our guides are available free on NFIB's website. Thanks, Holly, for having me today.
Great. Thank you, Beth, again, for shedding light on this issue that small businesses deal with on a regular basis, unfortunately. There's a link in the show notes for a comprehensive legal guide on credit card chargebacks with more information. If there's anything you'd like us to cover on the podcast, please send us an email at podcast@nfib.org. Now, I want to thank you, the listener, for joining us on today's Small Business Rundown. We'll be back every 2 weeks bringing you news and analysis from Washington, D.C. and state capitals so that you, whether you're a business owner or supporter of one, can continue to blaze a trail.
The Small Business Rundown is brought to you by NFIB, the voice of small business. You can find us at nfib.com and on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn.